Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. I heard one guy translate that, that instead of commands us to to engross ourselves in words of Torah, he says, and commands us to make Torah our business. So that's also good. So, that's a good one to have. All right. So let's go ahead now. Where we are today, where we're going to be going is. Well, there's a couple of things. Okay, we're going to be looking right here at Othniel and the Moabites, and then down here is Shamgar. So these three things right in here, that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. And just see, it follows that cycle that we had last week, where I put in there where the they fall into sin, they cry out, God sends a deliverer, he delivers them, and then as soon as that deliverer dies, well, then they fall right back into it again. So kind of a sad circle of defeat. But anyway, that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Here's our timelines that I leave on there. Here we're talking about somewhere around from 1350 to maybe 100, well, a little almost 150 years is what we're looking at, the time frame here that we'll be covering tonight. And then here's one of those timelines that just make you dizzy. So it's a little bit more spread out, but here we are with Othniel and Eglon and Ehud, and still sticking with Ehud here, and then Shamgar. So, and that's kind of a guess there with Shamgar, but anyway, that's kind of where we're at now. Judges 3:7. But Bnei Israel did what was evil in Adonai's eyes, forgot Adonai their God, and worshipped the Baalim and the Asherahs. Okay, so one of the things that sticks out in my mind here is they forgot God. I mean, they had fallen into just outright apostasy. They forgot, they rejected the God of their fathers. Instead, they worshiped Baal and Asherah. Now, just so to bring it back to your memory, the Asherah or Ashtoreth, that's the name of the chief female deity that was worshipped in ancient Syria, Phoenicia, and Canaan. The Phoenicians called her Astarte. The Phoenicians were the precursors of the Philistines, and the Assyrians worshipped her. They called her Ishtar, which a lot of people want to associate with our our word of Easter, but etymologically there is absolutely no connection whatsoever between Ishtar and the word Easter. Easter is it's a Teutonic word, comes from Northern Europe, and all over the world, the rest of the world, they call Easter that time frame some derivation of Pascha, okay, from the Pesach in Hebrew. So the idea that Ishtar makes Easter a pagan holiday, no. And when we get closer to that, maybe next year at Pesach, I'll jump into all of that stuff and talk about that, because a lot of people want to drive a wedge between the Messianic community and the Christian community with calling them pagans and all that kind of stuff. Well, I absolutely reject that. And let's don't call people pagans. Be nice. We're going to play nice. All right, because of Israel's incomplete conquest of the land of Canaan, the Asherah worship survived and it plagued Israel. Actually, starting as soon as Joshua was dead, as soon as he died, as soon as he died, and then all of the elders that were with him at that time, when they died off, then it really kicked into high gear with the idolatry. Now, Asherah is a lot of times represented as a limbless tree trunk planted in the ground. The trunk was usually carved into a symbolic representation of the goddess, and I think I may have another picture there someplace. But these that I'm showing you here on the left, these are figurines that they found, and actually they found hundreds of these things all across the Middle East, or maybe even thousands of them like that. So this was a very popular deity or little g god for the people of that time, and so the Hebrew word here for Asherah could either mean the actual idols, or it could be, a lot of times they would have these cultic centers in a grove of trees. Why? Because, hey, that was comfortable. If you had some trees around you, you could stay there and be comfortable in the shade. Otherwise, who wants to stick around and do liturgy in out in the middle of the desert where it's hot and everything? So being in the equivalent to us being in a place that had air conditioning or not have air conditioning. So, all right, and over here when we were at Hot Sore, there's a picture here of what they're saying is an Asherah pole. And okay, this thing is about, if I remember right, it's about 4.5, 5 feet tall. It's kind of hard to see, get an idea of how tall it is. But if you stand up right next to it, you can actually put your arm over on the top of it. That's just about how tall it is. But they find these things sticking up various places, and I think that's what Jeremiah in Jeremiah 10 had in mind when he was talking about taking a tree from the forest, and you cut the limbs off of it, and then you fashion it into something with silver and gold. He's talking about an Asherah pole. He's not talking about a Christmas tree. Okay, so anyway, that's Asherah was considered a moon goddess, and sometimes she was presented as the consort of Baal, the sun god. So you got the moon god and the sun god, the yin and the yang there. And she was worshipped sometimes as the goddess of love and war. Now, that was always kind of, the hippies wouldn't do that because they always wanted to make love and not war. So I don't know what they would have done with that. And then there was another goddess called Anath, which you'll find, we'll mention a little bit later on. And the worship of Asherah was noted for its sensuality, and it did involve ritual prostitution. And they also, the priests and the priestesses of Asherah, practiced divination and fortune telling. Now, Baal, everybody, that's just kind of the generic. That's the name of the supreme god that was worshipped in ancient Canaan and Phoenicia. And the practice of Baal worship that infiltrated the Jewish religious life all throughout the period of Judges, and it actually became very widespread later on in the reign of Ahab, and it also affected Judah somewhat. And the word Baal means Lord, and the plural of it is Baalim. And in general, Baal was a fertility god who was believed to enable the earth to produce crops and people to produce children, and different regions of the Middle East worshipped Baal in different ways. He was very adaptable, and sometimes he was the rain god, because if you don't have rain, you don't have produce, you don't have food, you don't have life, you don't have a kid. So I mean, that's the cycle of the having the fertility god. So, and some of them, some of them they called Baal of Peor. We already talked about that with a couple of weeks ago in our parsha with Balak and Balaam. And then there's another later on that we'll see is Baal Berit, and we'll see that one in Judges 8th chapter coming up in the future. So. According to Canaanite mythology, Baal was the son of El, which is the chief god, and Asherah, the goddess of the sea. Baal was considered the most powerful of all the gods, eclipsing even El. And the idea of El there. We see in our own Hebrew tongue, the El Shaddai, that's so we use that word, and the ancient Israelites also used the word for El. It's a title for God, like we say God. Adonai is our God. Hashem is the same thing. Only they would say El, we say God. It's a kind of a title. So anyway, that's enough on that sort of stuff. But sometimes the Baal worship again was very sensuous. It had ritual prostitution, and that's what also made it very attractive to a lot of people. And sometimes they required human sacrifice, typically the firstborn of whoever it is that's making the sacrifice. And so it was pretty nasty stuff. All right, going ahead. So Adonai's anger burned against Israel, and he sold them over into the hand of King Cushan Rishathaim of Aram Naharaim. And Bnei Israel served Cushan Rishathaim for 8 years. All right. Now, are you impressed that I could actually say those things? Well, I'm probably not going to try it again because I would stumble over it. But anyway, Cushan here, his identity, we really don't know where this guy was, where he came from so much. The idea, it's kind of funny because it's a play on words between there, that this name Rishathaim, what it means is the Cushan of double badness, or double wickedness. It's kind of like when my youngest son was mad at his older brother one time, and he was only about, I don't know, 3 years old, and he was going to call his brother the worst thing that he could possibly think of, that in his little 3-year-old vocabulary. And he said, he was so frustrated, he said, you two-headed creep. So I mean, that was the worst thing that he could think of, is you two-headed creep. And so this is kind of a play, that same sort of thing. The Rishathaim was a double bad guy. And it also rhymes with Naharaim, which, where was that? A lot of people say, well, we can't identify him, so he didn't exist. That just means that we haven't found him yet. That's all. So, these people that keep talking about because you can't prove it, the Bible, you can't find it, or you can't prove the Bible, then it didn't exist. Well, just hang around, because the archaeology continues to find stuff, and where people say, they'll look at it and says, wow, that really did happen in the Bible, didn't it? Yep, it sure did. All right, so a lot of people there. There's different ideas of who who this guy was. Somebody says some scholars say that he was one of the Kassite rulers of Babylonia, and those are mentioned in Genesis 10:8. Josephus identified him as an Assyrian king. Others say he was one of the Hittite kings. And some people say, well, he was an Egyptian ruler. So it's all over the world. I could go on. I got another whole paragraph of all the different ideas that they thought this guy was. And bottom line is, we really don't know. But he was, according to the writer of Judges here, he was a bad dude. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that. And so anyway, going ahead. Any comments or questions yet? If there are, just jump in there. Judges 3:9 through 11a. But when Bnei Israel cried out to Adonai, Adonai raised up a deliverer for Bnei Israel to deliver them, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger kinsman. The spirit of Adonai came upon him as he judged Israel. When he went out to war, Adonai gave King Cushan Rishathaim of Aram into his hand, so that he had the upper hand over Cushan Rishathaim, and then the land had peace 40 years. All right. So we've heard of Othniel already, okay, and what we're seeing here is that cycle beginning with Israel. Where we've already talked about it. Where I probably need to bring that cycle back and just stick it in our front of each one of these lessons, just so that I have it there. But you know how it is. They sin, they cry out, they get God sends a deliverer, they get delivered. Then there's a time of peace, and then after a while, then they fall back into the ditch, and it starts all over again. So Othniel was a son-in-law of Caleb, and the language is a little wonky there as to whether they say he was a younger brother of Caleb. That it was just so it's just we don't really know the exact relationship of how that Othniel was attached to Caleb, but anyway, he was somehow related to him, and so anyway, we do know that he married Caleb's daughter, because Caleb said, "Okay, I want this city taken. Whoever can take it, they can have my daughter." And so Othniel looked over there and said, "Ooh, for that girl, I'll take the world for you." So he went out there, took that city, and then he got Caleb's daughter, and that's another story. And crazy. All right, so we already know that he was a courageous warrior. He went out there and he really got into it, and but now he's doubly empowered. This time though, the first time he was empowered because he was a go-getter, and he was quite the warrior, and he was courageous, and he was I don't know if he was inspired by Caleb's daughter or what it was, but anyway, he went and he won the battle. But this time now, it said that the Spirit of God was on him. He was anointed by the Ruach, and that's a completely different ball game. So what happened here is, because he was anointed and empowered by the Holy Spirit, by God's Spirit, he was able to defeat this king. And then what ensued then was 40 years of peace after this 8 years of oppression. Okay, so now let's go ahead with the rest of that. So when Othniel, son of Kenaz, died, okay, get the pattern. Bnei Israel again did what was evil in Adonai's eyes. So Adonai strengthened King Eglon of Moab against Israel because they had done evil in Adonai's eyes. So he gathered to himself the people of Ammon and Amalek, and then went and defeated Israel and took possession of the city of palms. Bnei Israel became subject to King Eglon of Moab for 18 years. All right, so just like with Joshua, when the leader died, the people fall back into sin. When Othniel died, Israel went right back into their old sinful habits. And so, um, it's just amazing to me that they wouldn't do that when they had this leader. I don't know what it was that the leaders had over them that they would do that, but that was the pattern. As soon as that particular judge died, then the people went right back into their sin. So I don't want to get too far ahead of my notes here. So what happened here is because of that, then Hashem allowed Eglon of Moab, and Moab is kind of one of the perennial enemies of Israel, and they you know they're always fighting the Moabites, and then also Ammon, that was over there on the western side of the Jordan, same as Moab. Moab was on the west side of the Jordan, or east side of the Jordan. Ammon was over there on the northeast side, and the Amalekites, they were down south of Moab. So um, he got those two guys to come, those two nations, tribes to come along and uh, fight against Israel, and they beat up on them, they got them, and so then they it says they captured the city of palms, which that was Jericho. Well, Jericho had been destroyed. It had not been really rebuilt yet. It would not be rebuilt again until somewhere around, I think, Ahab's time. But anyway, so that area of Jericho, though, was very important as far as trade routes and so forth. So even though Jericho may have not been built back up to where it was a big walled city, it was still important enough that that's what was mentioned as uh, the the prize of Eglon defeating Israel, was that he got to have the city of palms, which was Jericho, and so um, let's go ahead with the let's go ahead with verse 15. But when Bnei Israel cried out to Adonai, Adonai raised up a deliverer for them, Ehud, son of Gera the Benjamite, a left-handed man. Now Bnei Israel sent tribute with him to King Eglon of Moab. All right, there's quite a few things here. Okay, Ehud was called a deliverer here. He was not called a judge. Now, what is the significance of that? I don't know that there is a significance. Some people tried to make some kind of a deal out of it that yeah, he was a lesser quality individual, but all the judges were somewhat flawed. Um, but anyway, they called him a deliverer and not a judge. Probably the same kind of thing, because what was the judge? He was basically a warrior that delivered Israel from the clutches of their enemies. So now the left-handed thing, again, that's something that's going to be kind of it falls into place. That there were actually it was kind of a novelty thing that the tribe of Benjamin had a bunch of southpaws in their tribe. and why that was, I guess just because of their marriage. I would have thought that it would have been recessive gene or whatever. But anyway, they had a lot of lefties in the tribe of Benjamin, and some people say that because of the Hebrew term for the left-handed was something like that his right hand was restricted, so that meant that he was a lefty, and so they said, well, he must have had a deformed hand or something that where he couldn't work with it. But um, you can say that I don't. I think I kind of reject that for this reason, in that because if he was going to be sending tribute, if he was going to be Israel's official envoy to bring tribute to the king, well, you're not going to want to bring a left-handed guy or a guy that has a wounded flipper on his right-hand side that he couldn't use that hand. Why? Because of the stigma of the left hand and the right hand and all that kind of stuff. Why? And we still have that same sort of stuff even today, because in the Arab world, the Muslim world, the left hand is used for hygiene purposes and cleaning up after you go to the bathroom, whereas the right hand is what you eat with. Okay, and lots of having lived over in those parts of the world for quite a few years, and being around people like that, there are places where yes, indeed, they still will eat with their hands rather than utensils, and there's a certain way that they would do it with I don't know. It's just depending on the country and the culture and wherever you were. And I've been in some fairly remote areas, say in Indonesia, Malaysia, and places like that, Muslim populations, and it's more of an idea that that's just the way they eat. They eat with their fingers, even. When you hire them and bring them onto the oil rigs, they will sit there and load up their plate and eat with their right hand, always their right hand. The left hand was the hand that you did your dirty business with. So the idea of bringing in a guy like Ehud, that he would have a non-functioning right hand, and all he could do is bring this tribute to the king with this left hand, the dirty hand. That would have been bad form, and I don't think that I just don't think that would have been the case. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Anybody got any comments or ideas that about that? Whether I don't know, maybe some of you have traveled around and seen some of that kind of stuff before too.
I was kind of looking at the cultural Bible background, and it talked about two things there. It says that in one of the Septuagints that the word is actually translated as ambidextrous, not left-handed, but that another implication was that actually he was trained to be able to fight with both hands, which would have actually give him an edge in warfare. Just like they liken it to today's athletes that might be able to be trained on both sides, or left-handed and right-handed. So they said that it was actually maybe a strength to give an advantage to him. So,
I also I read that commentary too, that it could have been ambidextrous, but the idea, though, that he displayed this left-handedness becomes important later on in the story. So either way, we don't know whether he was ambidextrous, if he was good, if he was an equal fighter on both sides, or whatever. But the Bible says he was left-handed. So, and I still suspect that his right hand was perfectly good, that he would have been able to bring the tribute to the king without offense. So, all right, good comment. Good comment. We'll any other comments before we go forward? All right. Ehud made himself a double-edged sword, a cubit in length, which he girded on his right thigh under his cloak. Then he presented the tribute to King Eglon of Moab. Eglon was a very fat man. Okay, so the narrative here kind of really gets compacted. That he presented to the king, and he made this sword, and then he presented the tribute to the king, and then the king was very fat. Those sentences, look, they're almost kind of like out of context with each other. But so Ehud made a sword that was specific for what he needed. Now, the word that in the Hebrew word there for this, where it says a cubit in length, was possibly one that there is a reference for something that would have been about from the elbow to the wrist. So that would have been maybe 15 inches or something like that. Looking here at my little handy dandy, it's about 30 centimeters or something. No, that's whatever 30. Whatever that is, it's about 12 to 15 inches, about 15 inches. And it could have been that something that would fit along his thigh. Now, one of the commenters that I was looking at today in the Biblical Archaeological Society, she had said that, well, he strapped it to his inner thigh. And I reject that altogether, because trying to walk and with a sword strapped to your inner thigh and rubbing and all that kind of stuff, that just doesn't work. So I think he would have had it somewhere on his on the outside of his thigh, but that he could still get to very, very quickly. Again, this would have not been the normal side for a sword, for him to put it. I mean, most men are right-handed, and you carry your sword on the left-hand side. Back in the day when Alan and I were cadet warriors, we carried our swords on the on the left side, and we'd pull out those swords and do all of that stuff that you do with swords for parades and all that kind of stuff. And that was typical. You'd use a cross draw. I never saw anybody doing swords that you pull it from the same side of what your hand is, because you didn't have enough room then to pull it out. So anyway, any sword that he would have had would have been over there on that left hand side. And so if they frisked him any at all, or they may just come over there and pat him on the left hand side and say, okay, nope, there's no sword there, and then let him go on, not even thinking about the idea that he would have a sword strapped to his right hand side. It just, there's a lot of these things that you just have to think that, what, God was looking down on this, and he was kind of orchestrating these people, and they did things that in retrospect you'd think about, man, what were they thinking? But anyway, so the description of Eglon is very fat. It was not complimentary. Now, a lot of times in different cultures, when they say that someone is fat, that in especially the ancient cultures, what did that mean? That meant that they had enough food and they had a whole lot more. I mean, that they had enough food that they were fat. When they talk about the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that the Bible describes them as getting fat on the kosher food and not on the king's food, the richness of the king's food. They actually got fat, it says, and that what that means is that they were plump and they were healthy. So this particular, the way that it is described, he says it was very fat. And so it was not complimentary like it would have normally have been, to just say that he was fat, on the fat of the land or something like that. Over in the Orient, it was kind of funny that sometimes they the men, if you had a little bit of girth to you, well, that was a good thing, because that meant that you were probably wealthy. Skinny guys, you might not be so wealthy because you're not getting enough to eat there. So it's kind of funny that just when you'd run across that over in China and Japan and Singapore also. All right, so and what this could have meant when they talk about him being extremely fat was that he required so much tribute from Israel that that left Israel wanting, and that possibly they had some hunger issues, and because there was not enough food left over for a proper diet within Israel. All right, so going ahead, the now when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he dismissed the people who had carried the tribe, but he himself turned back at the idols that were near Gilgal and said, "I have a secret message for you, O king. Keep silence," he replied. So all his attendants left him. All right, this is kind of the language in here. It's a little bit confusing, so we'll try to kind of ferret this out. So Ehud presented the tribute to King Eglon, and then they all left the palace or the residence of this king, and they headed back toward Gilgal. And then at that point, Ehud dismissed all of his people. Said, "Okay, now you guys that helped carry all the food and the tribute to the king, you can go on back home." And but Ehud went to these idols. Now, why did he go to these idols? Was it because he actually was worshiping there, or was he just suspected that people would be watching him? And so when he went to these idols and stayed there for a little while, and then he turned around and came right back to the palace. Back in those days, you remember the story of Queen Esther, where she couldn't come into the king's presence unless he said so. Well, you don't go back to this king unless maybe I don't know. It would have been unusual. So, but he went to Gilgal. He went to these idol where they had the idols, and which again raises some questions, because Gilgal had been a place where they originally had the Ark of the Covenant there for a good long time, and the tabernacle. And Gilgal actually means circle of worship or something like that, where they had lots of stone circle things that were around Gilgal. And so anyway, he goes back to the palace with this announcement of a secret message. And so Eglon looks at this and he says, "Oh, okay, a secret, huh? Okay." So he sends all of his servants away, and I think again, God kind of erased a little bit of the suspicion away from Eglon, because you just don't send your bodyguards away when you've got a foreign um, somebody that you're oppressing. You don't send them, and you're going to be all alone there, even though he's doesn't look like he's armed or anything. Maybe he might have picked up something and bonked old Eglon on the head or something. So, but anyway, he sent all of his servants away, and at with this idea, he says, keep silence, and that's kind of a strange way. But the servants knew what it meant, that they left him alone, and so the king and Ehud were there together, and so that sets the stage. So then, going on, Ehud approached him while he was sitting alone in a roof chamber where it was cool, and he said, "I have a message from God for you." So he rose from his throne. Then Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. Even the handle went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not withdraw the sword out of his belly, and the filth came out. All right. So where was there's a couple of things here. Ehud was he was sitting on this roof chamber, and it probably indicated that this was on toward nightfall. Maybe the sun was way low in the on the horizon, because sitting up on the roof during the daytime, that would have been very, very hot. Um, but typically, a lot of those homes back, and I've been to some. We were in a archaeological dig a few years ago, and it was interesting because the homes were built. They had what they did was they went down into the ground, and they would cut out of the sandstone blocks, and then they would haul them up, and that became the building blocks of the home. But then they would put beams across there, but then they would have a basement, and actually the people, that was their little home workshop, factories and so forth, that they would work during the day in these basements underneath the homes. Now this admittedly was quite a few years later than the era that we're talking about here, but possibly the same kind of technology would have been around for a long time. But typically, you wouldn't sit up on the roof during the daytime. So anyway, maybe it was an evening meeting, but he was up there to where they would have had a breeze going through, and they called it a cool place. And so this message from God, it piqued his interest. He said, "Oh wow, what is this? A message from God?" Well, we don't know whether Eglon was, what he thought about, what his religious thinking was, whether he was a religious guy, or if he didn't want to run the risk of offending anybody's God. So when when he got into, he stood up, and then when he stood up, that made it just absolutely perfect for Ehud to draw the sword and stab Eglon in the gut. And so they tell us in combat that don't let someone with a knife get within 21 feet of you, because you cannot draw your pistol fast enough. A person that knows what they're doing within 21 feet can get to you much quicker than you can, pull out your own knife or or a pistol or whatever if you don't already have it out and in your hand. And so obviously Ehud was much closer than that. He pulled the sword, stabbed him with it, and so the Bible talks about where it went into it's, I know it's kind of gross actually, but it must have been a downward stabbing motion here, because what it does is, the way that the Bible is, the Hebrew and so forth is written there, that the sword went in, and I mean, he stabbed him so hard that the sword went in. Well, it came out his rectum, and so because of that, his bowels, went everywhere and made quite a mess and a stink. Okay, that becomes important later on. So there is a reason for all of this grossness. All right, so hang in there with me. All right, so I'm glad I don't have to do a sermon on Saturday morning on Shabbat about this stuff. So anyway, here's a kind of a diagram that one of the archaeologists, and I'm trying to think of the guy's name right now. I'll leave it in the notes. But his first name was Baruch was his first name. But anyway, here's kind of what he has come up with as a diagram of Eglon's quarters, because they've actually found a place that kind of matches a description of what this palace or this residence would have looked like. And so you start down here at 1 and go into the audience hall. Well, then they have this Leah or Aliyah going up, and so, but this was also kind of where supposedly the coolness was, and there was some kind of a breeze going through there. I don't really know, but anyway, he does the deed, stabs the guy, comes back down, and he is able to escape. It says through the porch. And what I've got my own kind of an idea here is that he came out of here, he locked everything up, and he walked right past the servants, and walked on his way, because it says he went out through the porch. And so we really don't know, but this is kind of a plan view of Eglon's quarters that this archaeologist came up with. So I mean, you can take it for what it's worth, but it's still kind of confusing how that all happened, and why in the world would you have your toilet up there where you're sitting around lounging around just so that you wouldn't have to walk someplace? I don't know. Anyway, that's kind of funky to me, but maybe he wanted a cool place to do his business. I don't know. So he was very obese, so he probably didn't do a whole lot of walking. And there again, I still say that God must have made this guy much less suspicious than he normally would have been, because otherwise he would not have let all of his servants and everything go out. All right, so Ehud went out by the porch, shut the doors of the roof chamber on him, and locked them. After he'd gone out, his courtiers came and looked, but behold, the doors of the roof chamber were locked. So they said, he's only relieving himself in the cool chamber. So they waited until they were embarrassed, but behold, he still didn't come out and open the doors of the chamber. So they took the key and opened them, and behold, their master was lying dead on the floor. All right, so there you go. Some questions here. Ehud either had a key, or he found Eglon's key, because he was able to lock the door. How did that happen? I don't know. I can't figure it out. And I looked at all sorts of old ancient key door locking things, and mostly they were just kind of like in the old castles, where they have the thing that goes like that, plops in, and it holds the door when the guys are trying to beat the door down with the battering ram and that sort of stuff. And that's about all I could find from that time period. Because remember, this is late Bronze Age, early Iron Age period. So the idea of being able to forge these locks and everything, these keys and everything, I'm not sure they had the technology then. So Eglon's servants, they're wondering, okay, what's keeping this guy? I mean, they figure, okay, well, he's relieving himself. Why we know? Because we can smell it. This is because this is not a great big room. I mean, this is kind of close and so forth. So by that time, with all of that mess and it's all over the place, they could have smelled it. So it tricked them. It said, well, that's what he's doing. He's relieving himself into the chamber pot. So the Bible actually uses a word in the Hebrew that says, they dilly-dallied. It's kind of the way that the Hebrew word is. It's they kind of dithered about. They didn't know what to do, because they didn't want to go in there and disturb him. They didn't want to go in there and upset him, but at the same time, they knew that they had to check on him. So they opened up the door, and there he was, deader than a doornail. And so by that time, okay, see, there's an ancient door lock, and where you just slide that thing into place, and even so, I mean, that's even much later than the period that we're talking about with Ehud and Eglon, because I mean, they got wire there that's holding that thing in, and kind of like these little rivet things here. But anyway, that kind of gives you an idea. It would have been crude. Somehow he was able to lock it, and at the same time, somehow the servants had a key that from the other side they could open it up. So possibly the key was just one of those kind of a thing. The lock was one of those things that it wasn't secure, but it was a latch. It kept the door closed to just the casual opening of things. All right. So anyway, so let me get down to my points here. All right. Ehud escaped while they were lingering, passed beyond the idols, and escaped to Sarah. When he arrived, he blew the shofar in the hill country of Ephraim. So Bnei Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was on the front. He was in front of them. All right. So what does this mean? This delay that while the servants kind of dilly-dallied, that allowed Ehud to walk past there, get through the city gates or whatever, if there were city gates, certainly get past the guards, go on down, get down toward the idols, look back at the residents, wave, say, okay, howdy doody. And then by that time, if this was evening time, it would have been getting dark, he would have made his escape good. The location of Sirah is not known. We don't know where it was. There's several several places that they speculate, but they really don't match up, and we know nothing about it other than they just said he escaped Sarah. Okay, so Ehud rallied the men of Ephraim, and that's what he went blowing his shofar. That's what that meant. It was just he was sending out a draft notice to everybody, a call to arms. You guys need to ask some more questions a lot more often than this, so I can get a drink. But that's what he did. He rallied the men of Ephraim, and then they came out of the hill country, and it says he was in front of them. Basically, he led them. they answered his call, and they said, "Okay, yeah, you can. You're the leader." All right. So he said, "Follow me, for Adonai has delivered your enemies to the Moabites into your hand." So they went down after him, seized the fords of the Jordan opposite Moab, and allowed no one to cross over. Then they struck down at that time about 10,000 men of Moab, all stout men of valor, not a man escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel. Then the land had peace for 80 years. All right. So he said, Adonai delivered your enemies. For me, it's kind of interesting that he didn't say, okay, I have delivered, I have killed the king, and now we can go out there and get it. No, he didn't say anything like that. He said, Adonai has delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. He was not taking any credit for himself. Then they said they went down to the fords of the Jordan. I think Ammon and Amalek they'd long since gone home, because look, this is what, 18 years after the initial conquest, if you remember right. Okay, so this was the army of Moab. They were an occupation army. They were not looking for anything like this. And it says they were stout men. So there, you can also look at it. This is okay. These guys had gotten fat on the 18 years, doing nothing but occupation duty, not really having to fight anybody. They were just, just there. And so they went. They were trapped. And so Adonai indeed had delivered Moab into the hands of Israel. And then they had 80 years of peace. And so there is a Jordan River ford there. Okay. Now, whether this was the Jordan River ford that they blocked them off or anything, I don't know. We don't know what that is, because the Jordan River could have actually changed many times in the 3,500 years, so, or 3,000 years. All right, so going ahead, the last verse. After him came Shamgar, son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistine men with an ox goad. So he also delivered Israel. Now, all right, a couple of things here. Shamgar, he was not full blood Israelite, because why would he have a name, the son of Anath? Anath was a female Canaanite goddess. So, I mean, what Jewish mom and pop are going to name their kid after a Canaanite goddess? That would be you wouldn't do it. That'd be like a Jewish Jewish parents naming their kid Adolf Hitler. It wouldn't happen. So that tells me that possibly the father was a Canaanite and the mother was a Jew, or the other way around. But with the father having a name of Anath, the father would have been a Canaanite. All right, his weapon was an ox goad. Now, what's an ox goad? There's an ox goad. It's a big old stick, and it's got this little sharp thing on the end of it. At least this one does. Sometimes an ox goad, it'd just be a stick, a big, heavy stick, because oxen can sometimes be kind of stubborn. And it's not clear whether Shamgar killed 600 men in one battle, or if it was over a period of years. An ox goad is something that a guy could have in his hand and walk around, and nobody. That's a farm implement, for goodness sake. If he could walk around without arousing suspicion with anybody, because that's Shamgar, the ox herder. Oh, okay. And so then when nobody's looking, whap, he kills another Philistine. But we don't really know. Or it could have been just one of those kind of a deals where God empowered him, and I mean, he was Bruce Lee on steroids, and single-handedly goes out there and kills 600 people with this ox goad. We don't really know, but did say that because of that, he delivered Israel. Now, this action actually occurred. This would have occurred on the west side of Israel, because who was he fighting? The Philistines, and the Philistines were the descendants of the sea people. Remember the Phoenicians? Well, I read just today that recently in Israel they've dug up some graves over there on the Mediterranean coast, and they've identified them as Phoenicians. And they, because they went through the layers, it's amazing. They got these graves, and they actually were able to get DNA material from the bones, from the bone marrow of these graves, these skeletons, and they determined that the DNA of these people matched up the DNA from people of Southern Europe, Greece and Italy and the Aegean Sea and that area over there, and that then, because of the way that the graves are laid out, on the ones up on top, they tested those, and by that time, these guys had intermarried with the local population so much that they could no longer really find identify the DNA of Southern Europe at that point. So I thought that was very interesting that, with DNA, they were actually able to say, okay, yeah, the Phoenicians actually were from Southern Europe, just like we've been saying all along. And they could categorically then say that. So, but this, we don't know. It doesn't give us now said, okay, well, Shamgar killed these 600 people. And then because of that, okay, ching, 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 ching. Okay, Israel gets another 15 years apiece. No, so this probably occurred during the time of Ehud in that 80 years there. So that Ehud was over there securing the eastern border against the Moabites and the Ammon and Amalekites. And so Shamgar was over there whooping up on the Philistines and did a great job. And so that maybe that just the Philistine says, maybe we'll just stay down here on the coast and we'll leave the Israelites alone up there in the hill country. So anyhow, that's the thing for tonight. That's anyone got any questions or comments on this? What? Okay, nothing. All right. Well, then I will. I want to just wish everyone a good week. Shavua Tov. We'll see you next week.